Welcome back. We're going to be talking about a number of things. Primary among them is the elasticity of supply, and this webinar associates with the section in Chapter 5 called Income, Price, and Buyer Behavior. What we're going to look at today, we're going to review the 5 elasticities. We're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of elasticity of supply. We're going to chat briefly about buyer behavior, consider how the short run and long run impact elasticities, and then we're going to consider a couple of more modern views of pricing and business models. A brief review of elasticities. Last week we talked about price elasticity of demand, and this is a way to measure the relationship between a change in price and the quantity demanded. We looked at perfect inelasticity, this meaning that there was absolutely no change in quantity demanded due to a change in price. This was represented by a vertical line. Then something that was perfectly elastic, represented by the horizontal line, meaning that there's an enormous change in quantity demanded to a change in price. Then we have here the 3 more common types of elasticities, something that is inelastic, meaning that it has a relatively small change in quantity demand for a large change in price. We have something which is unit elastic, suggesting that there is a one-to-one relationship between a change in price and a change in quantity demand. And then we have something that is elastic, saying that there is a large change in quantity demanded to a small change in price. Price elasticity of supply seeks to give us a deeper understanding of what the actual supply curve that we face as producers, that is, elasticities are a unit-free measure of our ability to change the amount we supply to the market in response to a change in price. There's a number of factors that affect our ability to be responsive in the amount of product that we supply to the market. Certainly the availability of raw materials. If our raw materials are widely available, then that will allow us to be very responsive to changes in price. Thus, we would demonstrate a high degree of elasticity. The length and complexity of our production process. If we're involved in very long chains of production with very complex processes, that will very likely decrease our ability to be responsive. Thus, we would be more on the inelastic portion of the supply curve. Mobility of factors, that is, if the factors of production that we use are highly mobile, that is, they're able to be switched to different modes of production at very low cost, then that would allow us to be very responsive to changes in price in the marketplace, thus demonstrating a highly elastic behavior. Time to respond has a similar relationship as mobility of factors, that is, if we're able to respond quickly, then we would be highly elastic. If we have excess capacity, for instance, if we own a factory but we're using it 8 hours a day, and a change in price in the marketplace may make it reasonable for us to double our capacity to a 16-hour day production cycle, then we would be highly elastic. If we had no excess capacity, that is, if we were maxed out, changes in price in the marketplace would have no real effect on our ability to produce, so we would be very inelastic in our ability to respond to changes in price. And inventories, the nature of inventories that we have on hand, can also show up as elasticities. That is, if we have a lot of inventory on hand and there is a small change in price, it may be able to be reflected in a large change in the amount that we sell in a given time. As well as if we have very little inventory on hand, we will be very slow to respond to changes in price in the marketplace. There's really one key difference in terms of production between the short run and the long run, and that is that the factors of production classically considered to be land, labor, and capital. In fact, I think we could also add entrepreneurship into this legitimately, are, in the short run, some of these factors are considered fixed, and that may be represented in the long-term leases on the land that you have, perhaps payback periods of capital that you use to be able to buy equipment. And unfortunately, labor is considered to be one of the most flexible in the short term. That is, you can literally decrease the amount of labor you use from one day to the next. In the long run, all factors of production are considered to be variable. So the long run is entirely flexible, whereas the short run is some combination of flexible and inflexible. Now let us shift our attention briefly to the income elasticity of demand, and this is a way to measure changes in demand due to a change in income. So allowing that our income increases, which I think in general most of us hope that it does over time, the effect that we'll see in three different types of goods. So a good as a normal good is if we consume more of it as our income increases. A good is an inferior good if we consume less of it as our income increases. And a good is a sticky good if we consume the same amount, irrespective of income. Now there's another interesting effect around demand, which is a substitution effect. And this shows up for me personally with respect to the relationship between diesel and biodiesel fuels. My car can run either. And what's interesting to me is that the price of diesel tends to influence the price of biodiesel. Now, I don't think there's much connection between the production of either good, but what the producers and pricers of biodiesel know that they can track the price of diesel very closely. As long as those prices are in the similar range, I'm more inclined to choose the biodiesel. If the price of diesel was dramatically lower than the price of biodiesel, I would certainly be more inclined to want to choose the diesel, despite the fact that it goes against my value system. However, their ability to stay high with the price of diesel as it goes up is a way for them to capture additional producer surplus. As you may recall, producer surplus stems from this combination of supply and demand, where there's been a market clearing price and quantity combination. Now, as you buy any particular good, you actually buy it because it's worth more than the price to you. So the consumer surplus is in this triangle here, and the producer surplus is in this one here. This means that for some producers, they'd be willing to produce at prices lower than the market clearing price, but the market clear price is what works in the constructs of perfect competition. So this volume is considered producer surplus, and it could be increased if the price could be pushed up in any way. In the biodiesel example, the producers of biodiesel have increased the revenue, which is of course a function of price and quantity. They've created a tension by pushing the revenue up by increasing the price to track with regular diesel, taking advantage of the substitution effect. Now, in any business, there's a tension between cost structures and revenue structures, and this sweet place in the middle here is known as our margin. So we're going to look at that next. We're going to talk a little bit about margin, and then maybe do a little foreshadowing of some of the business models that are well represented in the Business Model Generation book, which you may be a little bit familiar with, and you will certainly be more familiar with in the next term. Now, this piece I've taken from a document that's going to be tagged at the end of this presentation. It's an ebook that I downloaded in exchange for signing up for a subscription to a pretty sweet newsletter. The ebook is called From Fixed to Flexible. It talks about pricing structures and schemes, and so I've borrowed this diagram directly from them. And again, we have this sweet space right here, margin, that is really what all businesses must know about. It's the single most important number to them. What's their margin and how's it being broken down? And so the classic way to increase your margin is by crushing costs. That would be to attempt to lower the cost by any means necessary. Walmart comes to mind for me as a great exemplar of crushing costs. They have a business model that's dependent upon exporting costs off to their suppliers. Another example that surfaces on the other end of this extreme, which is how we might increase our price, all of this being intended to change our margin. And believe it, a small change in your margin can have a big impact on what you're able to do in your business. However, let's think about who pushes prices. Well, I think there's one company that comes to mind that's positioned themselves certainly as a premium product, and they may have earned that through a number of ways, although that's increasingly coming under question. But I think Apple has well positioned themselves as a premium brand, and so they've been able to pull their price up. Now, these are choices that are often made and in most MBA structures quite legitimate, but I would suggest, as we consider how we might do pricing and approach costs, that there might be some values orientation. Perhaps values may show up in our choices around how we address costs, and maybe principles. Maybe principles show up in how we're pricing. My suggestion here, and these are open-ended musings, is there a win-win available? So is there a price point that I can produce at that creates a positive relationship with my customers? That is there a value in my customers feeling like they got a square deal from me in exchange for continued patronage? Is there a win-win? And are there other synergies that occur from being involved in a system in which fairness is a value? And we move on now into what I've dubbed some modern approaches, a modern view to some of the models that have been showing up. And these are certainly stemming from the Business Model Generation Handbook. Certainly the freemium model is something that we've become very aware of. This is offering a service for free and then changing it to a premium over time. Evernote is actually an example of this. They offer an amazing free service, and then for a nominal $5 fee, they are willing to give you essentially unlimited services. So they keep a cap in the freemium level, and they increase access. Another one is this idea of the long tail. Amazon comes to mind for me, which is to offer an extraordinary array of niche products, having a platform that is so inexpensive to run that selling a few things of a huge variety produces a significant income. And then there's also this idea that is also become popular in a handful of years, which is disruptive technology. And as a business model, forgive me if I sound like a bit of a fanboy, but I think Apple represents disruptive technology as well, in that this tablet that I'm building this presentation on, the iPhone that I have nearby, these are all new pieces of technology that disrupted existing markets and created whole new markets. So these are a couple of modern views for different types of business models that are emerging, and this handbook is going to give you a deeper dive next term. And as promised, we're closing up with a few elasticities. I don't really have a ton to comment. I've already gone a little bit long. There's really some complex and intense calculations involved in establishing elasticities. We have short run and long run interesting numbers for how inelastic some things are and how elastic others are. Thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you next intensive.